thanks for coming today. I think we've all worked on projects where we go into it thinking and believing one way, and we come out the other side having forced to change our approaches and our belief systems and how we view the world. And for me, this is one of those projects. So I feel fortunate to have worked on it. I think came out a better person. I think Kylie would agree with that, not to put words in her mouth, but it's really kind of a special project for me as a career sort of highlight. So I'm glad to kind of talk about it. So today, go ahead.
Can I just ask you to project as much as possible?
Yep. I will. Is that better? All right. Yep. I'm a soft speaker, so yelling is a thing for me. So, so today we're going to go a little bit heavier on methodology, knowing the group. There's an appropriate audience to sort of focus on what we how we put it together, what the data looks like. I'll be leading that, and I'll hand it off to Kylie, and she'll talk about results. If people are looking for a special data viz in this presentation, there isn't really any. We've really tried to make this as accessible as possible, the presentation, so a lot of tables. Graphs don't lend themselves to screen readers and accessibility, so we kind of keep it stripped down to a bare minimum. So if anyone's interested in that, sorry about that. So today we're going to look at the plan, kind of talk about the purpose, timeline, all the methodology, and as I'm talking or as Kylie's talking, feel free to pop in with any questions that you have. There's room for questions at the end, but don't let them linger. Just throw your hand up and we'll talk about it. I apologize, but I have to leave 10 minutes early. I have to catch a flight, so you'll see me sneak out. But Kylie probably knows more than I do, and she's more than capable of answering any questions. So today, to begin, the Olmstead plan. So the Olmstead plan, I would say, is trying to, is a comprehensive plan across state agencies, trying to increase community interaction with people with disabilities. The whole history behind this in terms of lawsuits and court orders. But generally, what this is trying to do is find out where people that are getting state services with disabilities, where they're at in terms of their community integration, and improving that going forward. And so what this survey is doing is trying to measure that progress. And so, over the next coming years, how better integrated are people with disabilities into the community? And so what this survey is a baseline data collection. So what we did was go out and create sort of the baseline measurement where we're at now. So what we're going to be talking today about is not necessarily a value judgment, good or bad. This is where things are now. There'll be follow-up surveys that will be doing that progress, either progress, static, no momentum, or regression. And so that's what we're going to be doing this year. We're actually starting the follow-up survey this year, so that maybe the next presentation you'll see sort of the change from baseline to follow-up survey. So I want to be clear about the other population that we did survey is a subset of the total population receiving long-term care services. So the results in the survey are not results of quality of life for anybody with a disability in the state. This is really looking at people in certain congregate settings that are sort of defined as potentially segregated. So I would think about these settings. We'll go through this list. Settings that are rarely or never, those people that are receiving services rarely or never have any communication or interaction with greater society or people without a disability, or people with a different type of disability even. So it's really looking at people that are, working with only themselves or their caretaker or service provider. Again, this is a starting point. I think the special thing about this survey is that really focused on a person-centered approach. A lot of surveys will go out and collect data and then link it up to sort of program data to get the full story or the full information. What this is doing is getting people's perceptions of their daily lives. So there are questions in this survey that are asking about how much money do you make, what's your income, things of that. So this is perceived information that they think they're getting. It's not necessarily true. It's all self-reported, which is interesting when you do compare it to program data. Things are all over the map. So what it's saying is that people really don't know what's going in on their lives. So it has huge questions, a huge impact on how services are getting delivered. So that's the interesting thing about this. We do have some really long list of comprehensive characteristics like demographics, disability types, location, all that stuff that we can really get individual outcomes and drill deep in. But this is really a person-centered. What's your perception of how you're receiving services, your quality of life right now? So I think it's a different take on more of a clinical study. This is really getting at what people are experiencing. And so as we went into this thing, we wanted to outline our goals for the whole survey. So because it's the baseline, we need to have a comprehensive sort of number of interviews to draw from, because this is going to set the stage for measuring going forward. So we wanted to complete 2,000 survey interviews. In the very beginning, the numbers 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 were being thrown around. We were able to sort of massage that to 2,000, which was a workable number, still very large, but as we go through it, it's going to set the state up nicely to sort of mine this data set and do the follow-up information from it. From that, we also wanted to achieve geographic representation, achieve demographic representation, and then representation across service settings. So the other thing that this survey is going to be able to do is look at we had 8 different service settings that I'll get into. It's going to be able to compare quality of life from each setting, because we have 2,000 people that are representative, mainly across those 30,000 people universe, so 30% of the statewide population. We're able to compare all these different things to look at quality of life in different settings, different regions, and different demographic types. So the timeline, again, was February 2017 through November 2017. Do the math, that turns out to be 49, 50 interviews we had to schedule a week. So really, really high burn, pretty tight timeline, a lot to ask, pretty stressful at times to be able to like monitor those numbers and keep everything in place just so we could reach our goal. This may be some inside baseball, but we had to extend our timeline a little bit. We originally thought we could get done in October, extended that to the end of November, but that's, you know, another story. The tool itself has 6 distinct modules. So I would look at these as 6 separate scores or 6 separate outcome areas, and they look at basically community integration. So that bucket number 1 are questions about estimated earnings in your work setting, so really getting a sense of what's going on there. The questions about integrative activities are really about finding out how people go out into the world. Where do they go, how often, with who? And then number 3, the decision control inventory, are questions about choices people can make in their lives, so what food they can eat, what clothes they wear, so really getting a sense of what level of choice they have. Question number 4 was the quality of life inventory, is really looking at, you know, again, choices about privacy and health, so a different, more intimate choice they have in their life. And then number 5 is a closest relationship inventory. That's all about looking at who's in their life that's not paid staff. That's friends, family, neighbors, people that they interact with that aren't paid staff. So it's really looking at how many relationships and how deep those relationships are. And number 6 was sort of an add-on with the use of assistive technology. The state was really interested in who's using assistive technology, so I would think about hearing aids or mobility devices, things of that nature, and how they're improving, how they're using them, and are those devices improving their quality of life. And so as we look at how the scoring is set up, all of these are scored on sort of a 100-point scale. So I would think about it being closer to 100 is higher quality of life, and closer to 0 is lower. And everything but assistive technology and participant characteristics are not scored. Those are more informational categories. The other, those buckets 1 through 5 are the scored buckets. Some background about the tool was developed by Dr. Jim Conroy from Center for Outcome Analysis. He developed this, I think, in the mid-'80s, early 80s. And so it's been in the field for decades, embedded by a lot of academic institutions and states that use it across the country. So what this tool also does is give the state a little bit of a benchmark to compare themselves with. It's not a one-for-one, because each state delivers services in slightly different manners, but it allows the state of Minnesota to see where generally they are across the country. So it's a really nice tool. Like I said, it's a unique way and approach and questions about asking about quality of life. So we can get into some methodology. Before I stop, are there any questions about where this thing, what we're trying to do with the survey, where it comes from, purpose?
Did you say something about who funded it, what the impetus was?
Sure, yeah. So this, the survey was a court order for the Olmstead plan to get that baseline. And so I was funded through MHFA, and that's where the Olmstead Implementation Office sits. And there, I have a little bit of a hierarchy diagram going on after this, but they're controlled by or overseen by the Olmstead Sub-Cabinet, which is made up of different commissioners across all state agencies or state agencies that are most affected by the Olmstead plan. So I would say like corrections, MDE, DHS, DEED, all those types of agencies. So, but yeah, our client was MHFA and Olmstead Implementation Office specifically.
It sounds like your methodology reached multiple different cultural groups, but is the survey tool also modeled and kind of rigorously tested with different cultural groups that have been around since the 80s and adapted to different cultural groups? Or?
Sure, yeah. So I would say just a note about that. The surveys are face-to-face interviews, and so with that, making all accommodations in terms of timing, interpretation, sort of paper copies. So it's really sort of really, like I said, focused, sit down face-to-face interview that, kind of cuts across that. So it's not a paper survey. Kylie can maybe talk more about
Yeah,
that.
so I would, as Daren said, it's been widely used and widely tested, and it is valid for all disability types, all ages, and pretty culturally valid as well, so across different race or ethnic groups. Colleen?
I just want to add to the conversation that perceptions about an interview for people who are considered to be nonverbal raised some issues out in the field. There were guardians or there were staff people at service delivery sites that thought, why are you interviewing a person who's nonverbal? They can't answer. At which point that became something we needed to address, because one thing about the survey tool is that it's designed if somebody can cognitively follow and can nod. You can say if it's good, bad, or in between, you will probably feel and they can indicate that. So that's another nice thing about that particular survey tool, that it has been tested and used with people who would be considered nonverbal, and that with our population was a real important point, and a point of education. We addressed that and readdressed that, however we want to talk about that in a short time. It was a theme of our meeting.
Yeah, and to like properly administer it, there's some pretty heavy training you need to go through. So all of our interviewers had at least 40 hours of training, classroom training, either like Kylie would lead, so what the thing is, look through it, and then practice, always practicing, because it's an interview, so you need to be sort of comfortable in front of people in different situations.
Can you address then, so if somebody is nonverbal and cognitively not able to nod through those gestures and give you an indication that they're comprehending severe profound DD, for example?
We allow, and Dr. Conroy, and historically, the next close friend. So that could be and it's the person who knows them best. It could be a guardian, it could be a caretaker, it could be a friend or a loved one, and that's typically in the person's choice. It gets a little complicated, who that might be and how you work that out, but proxy interviews are completely valid and we welcome them. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to have their voice be heard, and we know that some people need others to help them have their voice be heard.
Other questions? We can get into the fun stuff. Yeah.
So if you're having an interview with a person and say they're a proxy person, like let's say having a CDI, a certified deaf interpreter, with them that has a greater linguistic understanding of the person, I think that would be important for report too in the future. I don't know if that was part of the study.
That was welcome, yes.
So in terms of methodology and planning, we'll get into where the data comes from, how we approach sampling, just really kind of sketch out IRB, staffing and outreach, some more of the sort of nuts and bolts about how we operate in this field. The data we pulled was from DHS, and Indeed data set. So we had to sort of go through the rigmarole of data sharing agreements with 2 different agencies, which is a complete learning experience in itself. And again, these are a subset of the total home and community-based services population. We had about 40,000 individuals that fit a potentially segregated setting. That was our universe, a survey universe to pull from, got a sample from. In DHS, that was DT&H, adult foster care, board and lodging, ICSCD, nursing facilities, and customized living, and supervised living facilities. And for DEED, potentially segregated setting with center-based employment. So those are the folks we're looking to talk with. In terms of defining that, we used authorized lines of service as of July 2016. That was a specific decision we had to make. There's a difference between authorized lines and paid lines. We wanted the full universe, full possible universe. So anyone that was eligible for a service, we wanted to talk to them. We didn't necessarily care if they were getting that service or being paid for. We just want to know the full population. So in terms of sampling, we were kind of faced with 2 choices. So we needed a probability sample. We needed to make this thing so representative as possible. And had to choose between stratified or simple random sampling. So we kind of put up a pro and con of each different type. Click it again. We landed on simple random. For the main fact, it's easier to understand, easier to communicate the design. It's basically more reproducible in the future. And the fact that service settings are pretty political definitions, and they change and mishmash into each other all the time. And so really, if we did a stratified sample, we weren't confident that this thing could be reproduced in 10 years in the same way. So, you know, as our pool of our baseline of 2,000 people shrinks over time, some attrition, we wanted to reproduce it. If the state wanted to do that, simple random sample became the best choice. So years count, everything shook out. Sort of our sample size ended up being about 12,000 people, 11,600 people. You have in that eligible population, that's the universe, right? And then the sample percentage, that's what shook out in the sample. So fairly representative, we felt good about it going in. And we didn't really have to monkey with any of the settings at all. This is how it shook out by state. So this is sort of where the sample lives in our state. Red is higher density, lighter colors are lower density. Gray is no data, so that's where no one lives that lives in the sample. So you can see it statewide, every corner, Red Wing to Moorhead, Duluth to High Falls. So we have to set up the staffing system that's going to accommodate us to do this pretty efficiently, having to pay mileage, which is super expensive. You have to go from one bottom part of the state to the northern part of the state. So it was something we had to deal with. Basically, we didn't make any distinction. If someone said yes, they want to take the survey and they lived in Roseau, we were going to Roseau. So that it was anyone that was eligible, we're going to talk to. In order to do this, we needed IRB approval from DHS. We got that. Really had to have some really specific data, privacy control issues, all that stuff. We were able to work that through, forced us to really get a tight grip on how information was coming to us and how we're storing it. So it was a really useful process. I'm glad we had to go through it, even though it added on some extra time to get in the field. It was really useful. So back to staffing, what we needed to get done, this is all sort of daily activity. And so kind of put everything on paper, what we thought we needed to get done. And that's everything from developing a contact database, phone outreach, mail outreach, managing the consent forms as they came in, filing those things, all that different stuff. So we had to create a staffing contingent to be able to do that. And so this is kind of how the management structure shook out. So you have the Olmstead sub-cabinet sort of overseeing everything. We were working directly with OIO and a survey advisory group made up of people from MDH, DHS, and DEED. And then we internally at the Improve group had hired 22 interviewers from different regions of the state. We kind of divided the state up into 5 or 6 different categories and tried to hire from those different regions to be able to be flexible in our approach. And then we also worked through a phone vendor that was responsible for outreach calls, which you'll see were pretty significant. So we basically chunked up our outreach in 3 specific phases. First phase was just sort of the blanket cover of informational letters and to providers, people with no guardians, and DHS also sent a bulletin to all providers. So we're trying to get providers in a couple different ways because we felt they were the most important piece of this. They'd have the tightest connection to the folks we wanted to talk with. And after the letter hit the mailbox, our phone vendor started to call. Second phase was another DHS bulletin, then a letter to lead agencies asking for manager contact information. We're looking for case manager contact information, and then another phone follow-up with case managers. And the third phase was collecting guardian information, again, letters to guardians and phone calls back and forth to sort of suss everything out, where people actually are and who we can talk to reach them. So the way we handled scheduling logistics, the survey was operated in the field with tablet software using Snap Mobile Anywhere. So it's really slick. Didn't even need Wi-Fi connection. You could just store it if you didn't have it. Once you were hooked up to the internet, it would just upload. So it really worked really nicely. Coordinated calendars through Google Apps, and then used Google Forms to collect field issues to the field from interviewers. So if they went somewhere and they had some sort of weird interaction or they had the wrong address or something like that, we could collect all the things that were going wrong to be able to tweak things going forward. And then we trained them again in the survey administration, and the big one was recognizing potential instances of abuse and neglect. So a part of this whole thing is if interviewers are seeing potential abuse and neglect circumstances, they report it to us, and we report it to the state. So here are the steps to scheduling an interview. I think, I won't go through all of that, but basically it's reaching out to providers, having a lot of back and forth about what's happening, where this person is, how can we talk to them, or where's the guardian, how can we contact the guardian, and another round of communications with the guardian, and then consent forms coming in, and then scheduling happening from there. And this is sort of the final results of that sort of outreach effort. We completed 2005 surveys, so we passed our goal. We're happy to see that. Our sample size, of course, was about 12,000 people. We sent out about 20,000 individual letters. Took about 12 calls to schedule 1 interview. And so that was with case managers, providers, guardians, all that stuff. So lots of moving parts. If you think about 2005 people trying to do that. Phone calls made, 34,000 phone calls, give or take. We drove 153,000 miles. Give you $1 if you can guess how many times I've run the earth that is. And maybe 50 times. So if you do the math, it comes out to be about 84 miles round trip. That means we had an interviewer within 40 miles of anybody in the state. I feel good about that. I mean, it came out okay. Maybe you could have pared that down a little bit, but it's not as bad as it seems driving around the world 6 times. You had to file, we did file about 15 abuse and neglect reports. I think a few of those were actually legitimate reports that were followed up with. And we talked to 9,000 people on our sample generally. At some point, we didn't get consent from 9,000 people. We made contact with 9,000 people out of our 12,000 person sample. And so our consent decline rate was about 37%. So we got a form back from about 4,300 people. So I feel good about that too in terms of survey research. I think that's really strong, knowing that this population is probably the hardest population to actually get weak contact because of the way the information is set up and scattered around the state. So I'll do some quick lessons learned. We'll get into the data with Kylie. But basically, guardian contact information is decentralized. We knew it didn't live in the state. We thought it lived at the lead agency, the counties. It doesn't live there, or if it does live there, it's often outdated. So again, another thing, a finding of this is that there are a huge impact, I think, for the state to consider, and they are considering updating guardian contact information, where that should live, because in the current way it's working, there are some serious implications to really drastic, dire emergency situations. So we were, it wasn't out of the ordinary. We get guardian contact information for a person that has been deceased for 5 or 6 years. So there are instances, like that's not everywhere. It's not like a huge percentage, but enough to be concerning. Again, person-centered approach is key. Really took it as far as we could to be accommodating, to make it easy, to make it comfortable, and then found out that responsiveness and rapport were the key to getting consent. So Colleen did a fantastic job on the phone talking to guardians that had questions, talking to providers that had questions like, why do we need to do this? We just talked to people from another place doing quality of life. Why is this one? So there's lots of back and forth for the 12 calls. And the other thing, the planning fallacy is real. I'm a big fan myself of mental models and cognitive biases, I think, to help us make sense of the world. This one, basically what the planning fallacy says is that we have a tendency to underestimate time and cost and benefits of our actions. This whole project was that in a nutshell. It's like, what do you do when a major provider won't return your phone calls and they control the guardian contact information for 10,000 people? What do you do when a lead agency won't return your phone call, even though the state's trying to get them to do that? So like, basically what we did was manage, we had our plans, we need to have plans, but they're going to break down at some point. And so what we kind of learned, or what I learned, was like managing through values is the most important thing that you can to keep something like this, a big project, working, because values are permanent. So what's your approach of this thing going to be? What do you want it to feel like to other people? And then making decisions based on that. You have to be caught, of course, in time in your sort of front view of the vision, but if you're not thinking about the values, everything else is going to break down along with the best laid plan. Basic learning thing for me as well. That's what I have. Guys can talk about the fun stuff. Any questions on here before we move on?
Great. So I'm going to kind of dig into the results, and I have to stand to talk because I think my brain's connected to my feet. I will reiterate what Daren said at the beginning of this presentation. This project is one of those major life-changing projects. I've been fortunate enough to be working on it for 4 years since we started the pilot, and it has been, I'm amazed at what we've learned and what this data is going to be able to do for people who are receiving services, not just in segregated settings, but people with disabilities statewide. And I'm also, I feel really, really lucky that I have been able to learn so much from the people that we've been working with, the people who we interviewed, and then also the really strong team of people who represent both the disability community and people statewide. I've learned so much, and it's been incredible. And I am a completely different person than I was 6 months ago because of this project. So I'll dig into demographics a little bit, just to go take a look at how participation rates were. We had some real challenges reaching people, but we did find that demographically, as far as by gender breakdowns, we had pretty similar response rates to the actual population. There are more people in the state who receive services in potentially segregated settings are male that identify than female. So that's typical. So we were pretty close here. In that eligible population, we didn't have data on as many on the full sample. So we were able to gather more demographic information as we went out, is where that mismatch is. We did have some challenges reaching people of different race or ethnic identities, particularly people who identify as Black. I'll talk a little bit about that and where some of our other challenges for reaching people came up. Same with people who identify as Hispanic or Latino. It was a little bit lower. It was related to a similar challenge, and we did provide surveys in any language that the person requested, so it may have been a language barrier. We had a huge age range. Anyone who was receiving services in these settings was eligible to participate regardless of age, as long as their guardian consented for them to participate. So the youngest person who took the survey was 9 and the oldest was 90. It's a huge, huge age range. We did not include youth who are living with their parents. The survey isn't really appropriate for that, and the goals doesn't really meet the goals of the Olmstead plan in this particular section. So these would be youth who have been removed from their parents' home for reasons related to their disability. By region, this is where a lot of our challenges with reaching particularly people of color came about, is we had much lower response rates in the metro area than we did in greater Minnesota. And that's related to two things that Daren alluded to, being able to reach some of those larger providers, providers who hold contact information who serve most of the people in the state, and also some challenges in reaching some lead agencies. So participation from guardians or case managers in some of the metro area lead agencies is a real challenge. We don't feel awful about this though, because there are so many more people receiving services in the metro area that really this just allowed us to reach more people in greater Minnesota, where voices are often less likely to be heard as well. And as I get into the results, so just a refresher about the topics, we ask about community integration and engagements, activities during the day, so school, work, or other activities, integrative activities when we get out into the community, choice making, quality of life, close relationships, and assistive technology. So in activities during the day, we ask questions about what the person does during the day, how much time they spend at those activities, scheduled activities, if they earn any money, how much they earn, and that might be a wage, that might be a competitive wage, it might be a disability wage, or it might be paid by piecework, and how much interaction they have with people who don't have disabilities when they're at those day settings. We score this module a little different. We look at the average, the amount of time that they spend at these different activities, how much they earn if they said that they earn money, and how much how integrated they say they are. What we found is about a quarter of the participants said that they went to some sort of formal adult day program. That might be adult day care, it might be a day training, or not a day training, but some sort of formal program. About a quarter said that they work at a sheltered employment or a workshop, so that might be somewhere where you're sitting in a room and putting a label on a box and getting paid for each label that you put on a box. And then 60% said that they work in an enclave or a job crew. That might be a time where somebody is going out with a group of people to go work on a cleaning crew at a hospital, for example. On average, the participants said that they spend about 20 hours a week in a formal day activity, and that doesn't include transportation time to and from. This is typical, this matches about what people would be scheduled for in those daily activities. And that people who said that they earned money said that they earned on average about $95 a week. That is a much, much lower, and that hourly rate is much lower in a more segregated setting. So that might be as low as $3.50 an hour, which would be reflective of a disability wage. And then we do see that in the integrated settings, people were reporting lower than minimum wage. And that's a time where we want to just remind everyone, this is self-reported data, and many of the individuals we talk to never see their paycheck or may not know that they do have a paycheck. So we hope that this changes over time. We did also see that people said that they were between completely and somewhat segregated in most of their day activities. So that means in most of their day activities, the participants aren't really interacting with someone who doesn't have a disability other than the staff who are working with them. In the next module, we're looking at how much do people get out into the community and what are they doing when they get out into the community. So we're looking at, this is things like, how often do you go to the store? How often do you visit friends or family? How often do you go to a restaurant or to some other activity? We want to know how many people are with them, because the more people are out with them on an outing, the less integrated that is. And how much they interact with people when they're out there. So we're looking at the average number of outings per month and the average group size, and then we start to get into our scores, where we create these, an outings interaction score, which is based on the number of interactions and how much, the number of outings on a scale of 1 to 100, mostly because it's easier for us to understand a scale of 1 to 100. So on average, participants were getting out of the house about once a day per month. And that compares to the general population, about 46 outings a month, so significantly lower. Typical group sizes were about 3, which is great. A larger group size is more likely to turn heads and more likely to make people feel a little othered, and more likely to be, we're going out, the whole group home is going out together. We also saw that people were reported interacting with other community members on less than half their outings. So that's one of those things, it may be good, it may be bad, that's personal perception and personal choice, but we want to see how that changes over time. So most common outing types, you probably look familiar to all of us too, are going shopping, visiting with close friends and relatives, going to a restaurant, or going to a grocery store. We're pretty happy with that, visiting with close friends and relatives too. So that 10 monthly average of 10 times a month, pretty happy with that. When we get the decision control inventory, we're talking about choice making. So who in the person's life is making decisions about food, about activities, about where they get their services, about where they live, about who is in their life. A higher choice-making score means that a person has more control over their life. So we're looking for, are staff making decisions, or are the individual and the people that they choose to help them making decisions for them. We know that it's not appropriate for everybody to make decisions about every aspect of their life, but it's really important that the individual has control over who's making decisions. So here we're looking at a score of 1 to 100, again. Overall, over 35 different aspects of the person's life, we end up with a score of 66 out of 100, which indicates a moderate level of choice making. This makes it look like staff are making a fair amount of decisions for people. And that may be good, that may be bad, but we want people to be choosing who's making those decisions. So what we saw is that participants are really making the most decisions about how they're spending their free time, about what to wear, about when to sleep, and how or when or if they go to any sort of worship, do any worship. So they are getting to make some decisions about day-to-day activities. They're less likely to make decisions about where do they get services, or where do they live, or who lives with them. Decisions that are made at the state level. So those are really programmatic concerns, but we'll see what the state does with it. The next thing we're looking at is perceived quality of life. So how does the person rate their quality of life in different areas, good or bad? And this is things like health, getting out, getting around. General quality of life, and we're looking at a score of 1 to 100. Overall, the overall statewide score was about 76 points, about 77 points, which means that people said overall the quality of their life is good. Not great, good, not bad, somewhere in between there. So we'll be interested to see what happens here as the state makes changes.
What would that number be of people in this group?
You know, that's a good question, and I've done this survey when I was practicing. I did it with everybody in my life, and you know, most of us are probably going to be somewhere in a good, maybe, I don't know what the score would be, but most of us are going to be somewhere, often going to be somewhere between good or very good general population, but that could be changed by so many things, right? Health, climate, what are the conditions in your local environment? So that's why we want to look at it kind of long term to see how things change.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that actual score, if you dig into it, sort of metro versus non-metro, that sort of higher in the non-metro, and it's all about relationships, tighter relationships in rural Minnesota, which is, I thought, interesting. So we're focusing on connecting people in rural Minnesota. Maybe we should be focusing on connecting people in the metro.
Another thing that we wanted to see is how many close relationships do the people have and the participants have, and with who. What this shows us is another area, is that connectedness. And so we want to know the total number of relationships and what type. We did see that of the 9,500 possible relationships, so everybody who got to this module, which we didn't talk about, but was almost everybody who took the survey. Over 1,900 people got to this point. So they said, people in general said that they had about on average, 4 relationships. So we had most of them, but we could have gotten more. About half of them were relatives, which is a little higher than was expected. About a quarter of them were some sort of staff, of those relationships with staff of the home, staff of work, a PCA, some staff person. But this number of unpaid friends is really actually a good point of interest. 15% of the relationships were a non-staff unpaid friend. And if we look at some comparison studies, that number often is somewhere around 0. So the high number of relatives and the high number of unpaid friends is actually an indicator of some greater integration than some of the other studies that have been done. When we get to assistive technology, this is interesting because the state wants to know, are people using assistive technology, and do they know what assistive technology is really kind of what we're getting at here. About more than half of people said that they were using some sort of assistive technology in their lives. This is one of those times when personal perception is important too, because we would be sitting in the room, ask the person if they were using some sort of assistive technology. The person might be sitting in a wheelchair and say no. And so some of this is again, that perception and knowledge. Most of the participants who do use assistive technology said it was really valuable. It helps them be more independent, it helps them be more productive, and really decreases their need for help. So we're hoping that this would be another place where we're looking at how does delivery of assistive technology help people have a higher quality of life. So just kind of the overview of what the results are. It's a lot of results. With that, I guess, just any questions about the results? I know we've got about 10 minutes left in here. So.
Could we go back a slide?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yes. Yes.
I'm wondering how did you come up with the scores, and who actually gave the scores? Was it the person you were interviewing that said, you know, I'm a 53 or I'm a 94, or in a case where you were asking about the wheelchair or assistive technology, and they said, I don't have any, but they're sitting in a wheelchair. I mean, who scores that?
Yeah.
And if they don't have language, how do you come up with a score?
That's a great question. So each of those modules has a series of questions that we were asking, and they were all being asked on a scale. So for instance, for quality of life, we might ask, what is your quality of life? What is the quality of your health? Is it good or is it bad? And the person would say good or bad. And then we'd ask, well, is it very good or is it good? To get the person down to a single answer. And that helps if a person doesn't have much or strong communication skills, because a person might be able to do a thumbs up and a thumbs down to select their answer. They might be able to nod. We had people who blinked for a yes or a no. So you're able to get a lot of answers there. It's a nice way of asking the questions because you're only getting 2 options, which helps people to be able to cognitively handle the survey, especially if they have a severe intellectual challenge.
Yeah, I think this is my opinion about your question about the assistive technology. If we know we're seeing something right in front of the interviewer's face, the instruction was that the person's answer is the answer that's going to get recorded. Because the philosophy of this whole tool is really to get that baseline perception. It's not so much what's what's the census, what's the actual real, it's the perception of life and perception of experiences. And so that's going to lead to conversations about service delivery. And so like we know, for example, it kind of gets back to that, the earnings point, like we know people are making money, we know how much they're making because we can go into the records, but if they're saying they don't think they make any money, what does that say to how their services are getting delivered? Some programs you really need that barrier, but other folks can handle a checkbook that they don't know yet. So that's the philosophy of it. Really, it's like let's get the perception from individual experiences rather than the true, data.
And we did ask follow-up questions too,
Right.
so or provide information about what assistive technology might be. As far as the scores go, once people answer the questions in all those modules, we use the guidance from Dr. Conroy to create the module score. So that's the consistent way he's been creating a module score through the history of this tool. So if it's 35 items, the score is calculated based on the average of all 35 items and then converted to a scale of 100. Back there and then over here.
I'm a decision control inventory there, 6.2%. When you look at allies, was allies include only individuals, or didn't use words to speak, perhaps, and have an ally speaking for them? Or are you saying if I'm a 25-year-old individual and my mom is involved in my life and helps make decisions, are you counting that as them having decision control? Or did it break out as far as, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Was it really the individual making the decision, or when you say individual and allies, is that 80% of the?
So it's always going to be, the question is you and the people you choose to the individual. So when it's a proxy interview, that gets a little bit, that can be a little bit different, although we don't see differences in choice making, really strong differences in choice making by proxy. So it's up to the individual to decide if those are people that they choose. So say that I am receiving services and my mother is a paid guardian through the state, or she's paid to deliver some of my services and I don't want her to be, I could define her as I could not put her in that category. It's hard to break out, and there is another version of the survey that differentiates between the person themselves and family and friends, but that isn't appropriate for this whole population. And
I'm just curious how long each interview took, and then would you do each interview within one go?
About 45 minutes on average, and yeah, it's one sitting. So it's a long time for anyone to sit still for an interview, and it can be a really long time for somebody who, say, has an attention disorder or just cognitively can't sit still for that long. So the survey is broken up in a way to facilitate that, so each module really takes a few minutes.
You may have missed this data point that Kylie mentioned when close relationships. 1,900 people got, and that was the last module. 1,900 people completed that, and so they sat through the whole thing. And so it's a kind of a testament to I give the props to our interviewers in having them take breaks, allowing people to take breaks, really being comfortable. Because if your interviewer rapport is not there, people aren't going to sit around for an hour,
Yeah, we never went back to complete an interview unless it was not finished for reasons that were out of everyone's control. There were a couple of times where, there was a disruption on site that absolutely we had to leave, so we would complete that. But just really logistically, we couldn't go back to finish an interview if somebody stopped. So those would be some of the times people stopped.
I was just going to add, as interviewers too, we were trained to gauge how the person was feeling well, we're almost halfway through, would you like to do another module? So to give the person a choice to stop or to continue if we notice. And then sometimes the person has some distractions going on, and sometimes we end early because the services was our call. So I was really happy to hear that so many made it through the survey. I mean, that is great news. But yeah, we sometimes stop. But most made it through.
Yeah, and survey length was a big concern when, both after the pilot when we were stopping after an hour, but the surveys were going longer than an hour. And then when we were going through the IRB process, that there were some real concerns about, is this too long, and are people going to be able to complete? So we did make some adjustments for that, but we're really, really happy to see that people did really stick it out, and most people, we did collect some debrief surveys and ask people how they were doing afterwards, and most people really said that they had a positive experience. Most participants said they had a positive experience, and again, I think that's to the credit of the interviewers who did such a good job of taking the time to build a relationship and really were really genuinely interested in learning about the individuals that they were speaking to. Yeah.
What happens next with the survey data? What are the plans for that? And this is, okay.
That's a great question. So we had a huge survey data dump, and we've got all of this information, but we're not doing a whole lot. Not a lot is going to happen with it until the follow-up survey. Follow-up survey is going to happen soon. Planning is in process right now. So for the follow-up, we're going to most likely go back to 500 of those 2,005 who completed the survey and say, all right, this is where you were then. What's your quality of life now? And then really to start to see what those changes are over time. And people at this point, some people may have moved out of those potentially segregated settings. Their services might have changed. So we'll track those individuals as well, as hopefully people are moving into some more integrated services, so we can see some changes in quality of life through those services.
Is there a similar study to people in non-segregated settings? So life-size individuals who may live in an apartment. And what would they report on seeing this?
We wish there was. That's really, we wish there was. We know that there are some real challenges with some of the other services, like individuals who live independently and use the PCA and can't get good PCA services, personal care assistant services. And so we'd love it if the survey was bigger and broader. It was a really a strategic decision to focus on this particular population, both because it's the focus of the Olmstead, the strongest focus of the Olmstead plan, and the places where we would hope to see the most improvement, and ultimately to roll up into more communities.
Yeah, I think the thinking with folks at the state is that if we're improving services in the most segregated settings, there's sort of like for lack of a better word, trickle-up effect, where like all services, by definition, would improve at some level. The person-centered approach, I think, is the beginning of that, but that's the theory. But I guess it's a good point about collecting data for that. Maybe the next step in the future.